Cobblemen by David T. Smith, 1932. Yorkshire cobbles are peculiar to the coast between Whitby and Flamborough Head. Their pedigree, like that of the men who man them, is Viking. They are clinker-built and flat-bottomed, the functions of a keel being supplied by a heavy rudder projecting well below the boat. These flat bottoms enable the boats to be beached on sandy shores. A mast stepped well forward carries a lugsail. They are open boats, have big bows, and so long as their heads can be kept to the seas, will ride out almost any weather. The one danger is that of being pooped. Sailing a cobble is no task for a novice, as these boats are extremely quick. On the cobble landing at Filey, just above high water, there is an old tarred shed, the birthplace of the fishing fleet. The owner was an old man when I first knew him over the building of a boat. All his life he had built boats for fishermen in this tarred shed by the shore. All the boats on the beach were products of his skill, children of his hands and mind, each one different from another, to each its special quality, yet all showing relationship of line. He was a craftsman of the old school, who handled tools as though they were alive, and put them down as though they were in partnership with him. He used no templates, trusting to the accuracy of his eye. Now he has gone, and there is no one who can take his place. He built the Tyke for me, the best sailing cobble, he often said, that ever passed out of his hands. Built in Yorkshire, by a Yorkshireman, for a Yorkshireman, to be manned by Yorkshiremen on the Yorkshire coast, and her timbers were all grown within a few miles of her birthplace. His reputation had of late years spread far beyond his native town. Boats built in his old tarred shed are doing work for the government on rivers in India. He had trained a son to succeed him, who died a year before his father. The demand for small sea boats is a growing one. Surely the love of craftsmanship will bring him a successor. It is 3:30 a.m. on a cold midwinter morning. There has been a fall of snow early in the night. It is pitch dark and very cold. Men in oilskins and sea boots move about the cobble landing, shoveling snow out of their boats, stowing long baited lines, flapping arms and stamping to get their circulation going. In the town above, ordinary folk are fast asleep. Rumble, 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 a cobble on her wheels is rushing down the paved landing to the sea. Now the launchers, standing in the breakers, have got her. They are the older men, no longer strong enough to face the winter, fishing in open boats. She is off her wheels and afloat, her crew wade out and board her. She is away through the surf, vanishing in the darkness of the night. It is beginning to snow again. The launchers walk slowly up the hill. They will not be wanted in the surf until the boats return at midday. They are cold and wet. A hot drink and a bit of a lie down will not come amiss. By 5 o'clock or soon after, many will be helping the women and the lads scanning mussels and baiting. Out at sea in the dark, Vikings are laying long lines for cod. The crew of a cobble engaged in winter fishing for cod is 3 men. The method of fishing is shooting long lines. The lines are weighted at intervals with stones to make them sink. The length of a long line is 6 half pieces of 45 fathoms each, that is 270 fathoms or 540 yards, roughly 3 lines to a mile. Some of the Filey cobbles have this winter laid 18 to 20 lines a day, one cobble taking 21 lines. This means roughly 7 miles of line with 5,040 baited hooks, each line having about 12 score hooks. All this line is shot and hauled by hand. 1 mussel is enough for a haddock, but cod need a big bait. It is therefore necessary to put several mussels on each hook. Some idea can be gleaned from these figures of the work the women and old men do in preparing lines for those who go to sea. A 16-stone bag of mussels will, if the whole line be baited with them, do about 4 lines. All the mussels have to be skinned, that is, opened like oysters with a knife. It is sometimes considered too expensive to use mussels only, as they have to be bought. Parts of the line are therefore baited with flithers, limpets, and whelks. All this takes place in the living room of the cottage. Within a very short time of finishing for the day, the house is spotless. Bait is a very important part of a fisherman's business. Mussels are essential if good results are to be obtained. There is not a big bed near Filey. A few come from the Morecambe district, but the majority from Holland. A mussel boat comes into the Humber twice a week. It is a great pity that we have to buy bait abroad. Surely with our coastline and a little enterprise a sufficient supply could be cultivated. Whelks come from Sheringham. Filey can supply its own sandworms, but Scarborough fishermen have to purchase them from the Blackpool district. A very popular bait, which can only occasionally however be obtained in quantity, is the razor shellfish, known locally as warfish. The best time to catch them is on frosty nights when the tides are low and there is an easterly breeze. They come up in a frost and can be seen standing half out of the sand like candles. They are very difficult to stalk, being sensitive for vibrations, and can shoot down beneath the sand with great rapidity on the approach of a human foot. Frost will harden the sand and make their descent less rapid, but the best friend of the warfish catcher is a strong breeze, which will wash them out of sand. In the old days, that is the day of the sailing yawls, the age in which the present old and middle-aged fishermen received their sea training, frozen bullock livers were used very largely for bait by the boats going to the Dogger for haddock. They would bounce if thrown on deck. A boat would take up to 100 pounds of liver. Flithers, limpets, were also very largely used by these boats. In those days women gathered the flithers, but do not do so now. Up to 1,000 herrings would also be carried to be cut up for bait. They are very largely used today for whiting. Life on sailing yawls was hard, but not too hard, judging by the splendid races of men it produced. These boats went to the Dogger for a week, that is a week from port to port. They had to return within that time for ice and grub. They started out on the Tuesday and returned, all being well, the following Tuesday. It was 120 miles to the fishing ground, and sometimes if there was a headwind it would take a boat until Friday night to get there. She would fish on Saturday and start for home on Saturday night. If wind and weather prevented her from getting there until Saturday night, she would turn round and start for home without fishing, because no fisherman in those days would have dreamed of shooting lines on the Sabbath. Men got very little sleep, being constantly called out to set or shorten sail. One man with a coal shovel does all that work on a steamboat. Sail has its advantages and steam hers. You can coal in mid-Atlantic in a sailing ship. If you run short of power it will not be for long, and you have nothing to pay on delivery. The lift of a boat under sail on a wave is different from that of a steamer. Wind, wave and sail, like well-matched dancing partners, move together in perfect tune. Graving, for worms, entails much hard labour, the creature's powers of rapid retreat being considerable. The weapon used in their pursuit is a 3-pronged fork on the end of a 6-foot pole. The prongs of the fork are short and stout. The graver works in a partly doubled-up position, which enables him to use his knee and the top of his thigh as levers, and to work with great rapidity. The worm's home is located by the presence of a funnel-shaped depression in the sand round his front door. Crab and lobster catching begins about January. My boat, Barbara, is this year running 120. One of the chief enemies of the crab catcher is frost. The crustaceans are very susceptible to cold, and burrow deep down in sand until the return of warmer weather. A slight swell is an advantage, as it stirs up the food and tempts crabs to wander about. If a lobster gets into a pot, he will not allow crabs to enter. If you find crabs and lobsters in the same pot, you can be sure that the crabs were the first arrivals. Many pots are lost every year in bad weather. The Fishing Board's regulations about the size of lobsters that may be taken have for many years caused much discontent, which is, I think, justified. Foreigners are allowed to land in England lobsters of a size which English fishermen are not allowed to sell. That is not quite true, because if an English fisherman catches his lobsters outside the 3-mile limit, he can bring them ashore as imported lobsters. To the non-official mind, this state of affair appears ridiculous. Filey Lobster Ground is not outside the 3-mile limit. That of a neighbouring town is. Filey fishermen are therefore obliged to put back lobsters of a size which their neighbours may sell. A subsidiary business is winkle gathering. 2 men did very well out of it last year, sending many sacks of the snails to London, where they find a ready market. There is good winkling ground at a place several stations up the coast from Filey. Our friends took a handcart with them to transport the sacks from the cliff top to the station. The railway company charged for carrying it at perambulator rate as a wheeled vehicle. They only charged once. Next journey the wheels were taken off and travelled in the carriage. The body of the vehicle went in the guard's van as personal luggage. But the best ground for winkles is in Gristhorpe Bay, 3 miles north of Filey. Here cliffs of boulder clay descend 270 feet to a shore formed of flat rocks and big boulders covered with seaweed. Numerous channels cut in the rocks by the action of waves make it an easy matter to be cut off by the tide. The best markets for winkles are in the winter months, and the colder the weather the better the sale. Why this is so I do not know, unless it is that fewer people go a-winkling in winter weather. Those who have never tried it, or whose experience is confined to catching a handful of the snails in warm summer weather, when they walk upon the rocks or hide just below the surface of the water in fairy pools, will probably consider that winkling is no job for a robust man. Winkling at Gristhorpe in winter is a giant's job. The winkle gatherer walks the 3 miles to the cliff top in sea boots, descends the 270 feet of clay, which in winter is of the consistency of butter, and sometimes up to his thighs in water, heaves the boulders over in search of his prey. In cold weather winkles gather in clusters in depressions on the underside of the boulders in comparatively deep water. Having gathered 8 to 9 stones weight of the snails, which takes him several hours, he slings them over his shoulder in a sack, and reclimbs the slippery cliff 2 feet up, 1 foot back most of the time. When he reaches Filey he is glad to put the wet winkles down. Laying trots is at times a profitable form of fishing. A baited hook on about 18 inches of line is firmly attached to a stone about the size of 2 fists. At low tide mark the stone is stamped into the sand, leaving the baited hook on the surface. Fish coming in on the flood take the bait and are hooked. At the following low water the fish can be taken up. We often had 40 or 50 trots set. We also set trots among the rocks in Gristhorpe Bay, and by this means occasionally obtained large cod, which came in on the flood to feed among the seaweeds. There is something very fascinating in the scene on a moonlight night when waiting on the wet sands for the ebbing tide to reveal the fish you have caught. On dark nights visitors looking out of their bedroom windows may see the lights of lanterns moving to and fro. These are not the lights of smugglers, but fishermen attending to their trots. We catch bass on trots in winter off the mouth of a burn which discharges its waters over the sands into the sea. I understand from my books on sea fishes that bass ought not to be on the Yorkshire coast in winter. Nevertheless they are there, and make into very good fish pies when caught. Clock time has very little meaning to the inhabitants of a fishing village. Daylight saving bills make no difference to them. The ebb and flow of the tides is the only clock by which their lives are regulated. On tides depends their departure from and return to harbour, the shooting and hauling of their lines, their meals and hours of sleep. Visitors often forget this. Not long ago I overheard one of them who had left his hotel for a short constitutional before lunch remark, "These boats never seem to be out. I am sure there is nothing to stop them on a day like this." Lazy beggars, those fishermen. The lazy beggars had that morning been out from shortly after 3 a.m. until nearly midday, and were then getting something to eat before starting to bait lines ready for next morning. They would in all probability still be working when the visitor sat down to his second dinner, and would be off again hours before he thought of dragging his soft body out of bed. When all fishing boats were dependent upon native wind instead of imported petrol, time was an even less calculable factor. In a calm under sail a man learned infinite patience, that power to sit still and wait which the hurry of modern life tends to kill. One of the greatest powers for good, the power to do nothing and enjoy it, appears to have largely been lost of late years by visitors to the seaside. They have not the stamina to spend a quiet Sunday. A few years after the Great War ended, I asked an old West Riding gardener what was the matter with the world. "Since 'twar," he said, "everybody's getting fidgets, especially t'women. They can't settle the sens, and they won't let nobody else settle." Until the Great War changed matters, Filey fishermen never launched a boat on Sunday, and visitors would not have thought of asking for one. Most of the men still refuse to launch on Sunday, but a few, under pressure, have begun to do so. Visitors should remember that a fisherman's life is a very hard one. He needs a day's rest once a week. Monday morning is a good fish market for cobblemen. Supplies over the weekend are short. The cobblemen are able to get fresh fish onto the market before the bigger boats return it and flood it. An early start on Monday morning, tides permitting, is desirable. I have heard it said that, in the old days, men would assemble by their boats on Sunday night at 5 minutes before midnight, wait until the parish church clock struck Monday morning, then away to the fishing grounds. The principal business of cobblemen is the autumn, winter and spring fishing. The summer season is a very short one, and does not last more than 6 weeks, which cover school holidays. Some of the men do not cater for visitors, being busy with salmon nets, lobster pots or night trawling. Others fish early before the visitors are out of bed, clean up their boats ready for parties, and may even go trawling after the visitors have gone to bed.